Hey, Natalie, it's Megan. One of our presenters from the Paramount Development team is unable to get on. I think you should have just gotten an email about it, but wondering if you'd be able to help with some technical behind the scenes support.
Definitely, I'll check for that now. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
I think in light of where we are with the moment and time, we're going to go ahead and get going. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. I'm Dr. Holt. And as you know, Tri-Excellence has the opportunity to be the strategist, consultant, and facilitator for the Executive Steering Committee, as well as the Historic Nonviolent Advisory Board. And Erica is going to lead us in our opening today. So,
Natalie, if you could begin sharing for me, or Amber, my apologies. Natalie might be helping us with our technical issue, getting another one of our technical team members into the room. While we wait for her, welcome to all of you again on this February 22nd, as we are closing out Black History Month. We appreciate you being with us. And the work of Harvard historian, Brother Carter G. Woodson, who first established Black History Month and helping us to remember and see the vital contributions of Black Americans. For many of you who do not know, it's in the month of February as we're recognizing Abraham Lincoln and Brother Frederick Douglass's birthday. So hopefully our observation and our contributions continue past February as we celebrate all of who we are. Thank you again for joining us. Next slide, please, at the Executive Steering Committee for the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project. Quickly, for those Executive Steering Committee members in the room, I would love to have you just acknowledge your presence. President Lynn Peterson with Metro.
Hi, good afternoon, Lynn Peterson.
Yes, great to have you. Thank you. Mr. Brendan Fenn with ODOT Urban Mobility Office.
Good afternoon, Erica, members of the ESC.
Thanks, Brendan. Jana Jarvis, the Oregon Trucking Association. And she's already let us know that she's
I'm here.
Thank you.
I'm here. Sorry, I did hear you. Thank you.
Indeed, no worries. Mr. Nate McCoy with NAMAC.
Present.
Thank you for being here. Marlon Holmes with the Northeast Housing Strategy.
Present.
Mr. Bryson Davis with the Williams and Russell Project. I thought I saw Mr. Davis in the room, but we can come back. Thank you to those of you who have joined us for this incredibly packed and hopefully engaging conversation around the project. Next slide, please. You all are familiar with this. We want to make sure that you know your voice matters. Today, in light of all that's going through, we want to make sure that you all are engaging. If we have to call upon you, we know that you are not shy. You will jump in. Obviously, we want you to speak your truth, as you all do. Listen for understanding, deal with the issues and not with people. We may have some uncomfortable conversations, but we know if we're diving in to deal with issues and not people, we can move forward. In light of that, we may experience some discomfort, but we'd also like for you to remain respectfully engaged. So those on the Executive Steering Committee who can, please keep your cameras on so that we can see your faces. And lastly, but definitely not least, we did not get to this place overnight. So expect and accept that we won't be able to solve everything today, but we definitely want to move forward to outcomes that we can all be proud of. Next slide, please. I think I mentioned just a moment ago, we're coming towards the end of Black History Month. And again, I would admonish us as we move into this last week and into the next months, that we don't just limit it to February, but we continue to celebrate our uniqueness, celebrate our differences, even as we move into the remainder of the year. It's what makes us all great as we contribute to this community, this great project. Next slide, please. Perfect. At this time, we are going to move into the public comment section. Miss Natalie is going to help with that. I believe there may be some folks already who have their hands raised, who would like to let their voice be heard in regards to this important work. And so, Miss Natalie, if you would share the countdown screen for us and get us started.
Absolutely. Just one moment, please.
We have 4 members from the public so far who have their hands raised and would like to give comment for this meeting in regards to the agenda. As she's getting her screen pulled up, today's agenda is focused heavily on the independent cover assessment team, and you will be hearing from them and have the opportunity as the Executive Steering Committee to weigh in regards to their study and how they are presenting to the broader community in workshops this coming weekend.
Okay, there you go. Can you see that now?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, just a little technical difficulty there. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, I see 5 hands raised at the moment. Just a reminder, our public comments today are limited to 1 minute in duration. This is consistent across all of our project committees, and the reason for that is just time. We encourage and invite you to make more extensive comments in the methods outlined on your agenda today. But for now, they'll be limited to 1 minute, and comments going longer than 1 minute will unfortunately need to interrupt. And nothing personal, just the need to move on and be respectful of committee time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and unmute Ada Crandall, and apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name in advance. Ada, I'm going to ask you to unmute, please.
Hi, I'm with Sunrise, and I'm here with 2 others. Is it okay if we present our testimony in a specific order?
Oh, certainly.
Okay, it will go me and then Josh and then Paxton.
Josh Spector. And then, I'm sorry, who was the third?
I believe she said Paxton would be the third presenter.
Yes.
I do not see a Paxton on the attendees with hands raised.
Well, let's move forward with Miss Ada.
All right.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Ada Crandall and I am 14 years old. My former middle school, Harriet Tubman, sits just 30 feet from the freeway you want to expand. The air quality there is already some of the worst in the state, and it's literally making my classmates and I sick. On bad days, we could see the smog in the air during recess, and kids with asthma were afraid to even go outside at all. And that's just the current situation. I, a 14-year-old kid, shouldn't need to be here telling you that adding more lanes to I-5 is only going to make things worse. I should be able to trust that my elected officials will do what is best for our community. I shouldn't have to worry that a member of my district's own school board would prioritize expanding freeways over the health and safety of Portland students. Imagine you were in middle school and instead of going to soccer practice or hanging out with your friends, you were planning rallies and writing testimony, desperately trying to convince your state's government not to expand a freeway into your school. And as horrifying as that is, this isn't just about Tubman. It's all a part of a much larger issue, climate injustice. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. We'll go ahead and move on to the next presenter, next commenter. Josh, please make your comment.
Yes, and Paxton's name is under Sunrise PDX on this.
Got it. Thanks so much for that.
Cool. Hi, my name is Josh Spector, and I'm an organizer with Sunrise PDX. We are terrified of the impact this project will have on our lungs, community, and planet. Already 40% of Oregon's carbon emissions come from transportation, and we simply cannot afford to continue spending billions of dollars on infrastructure that exacerbates the climate crisis. Last year, I worked for a satellite company compiling a data set on road and building growth across the world. I spent months parsing through imagery of our natural world being ripped apart and replaced with soul-sucking concrete. As someone who is an Oregonian to the bone, I'm extremely concerned that this follows in the footsteps of the most harmful development projects humanity has ever implemented. As anyone who lost power last week knows, we need infrastructure that will strengthen our resiliency, not weaken it. These storms are going to get worse no matter what. I was born after it was too late. But we release all of our power to reverse this without an immediate end to the fossil fuel infrastructure like the freeway widening backyard of Harriet Tubman Middle School. Let's be clear. ODOT is talking about restorative justice. Proposed action is the expansion of a toxic, polluting freeway through the heart of our most vulnerable communities.
Thank you for your comment. I will go ahead and move on to Paxton and allow you to make your comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Paxton Rothwell. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm an organizer with Sunrise PDX and I'm 26 years old. While I appreciate being given the opportunity to testify today, it is appalling that I'm only being given 1 minute to inform you about the many ways this freeway expansion will harm the community and climate. Frankly, it seems to me like you do not want to have the public be engaged in this process, just like you did not want the public's voice heard when they demanded ODOT complete an EIS 2 years ago. The current best available science states that we have less than 10 years to prevent irreversible damage from the climate crisis. We need to stop making the wrong decisions about emissions today. The lowest emission way to reduce congestion in the Rose Corridor is to shift freight to rail and to get drivers onto public transit as soon as possible. I'm terrified because we are seeing the effects of climate change already. The summer's wildfires and the recent snowstorm in Texas should be a wake-up call to our leaders that we desperately need to do everything we can to address this existential threat to humanity. Instead, our government officials are spending their money Monday afternoon sitting on Zoom calls, still discussing a freeway expansion project that will increase our carbon emissions. Can I count on you to demand that ODOT conduct an EIS for this project?
Thank you for that comment. I will go ahead and the next commenter is Lo, I think. I'm going to ask you to unmute and provide your comment.
Hi, it's Io, and thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Io. I am an 8th grader at Harriet Tubman Middle School. I only have 1 minute here, so I'll get straight to the point. If you were to expand the freeway, it would only worsen the existing air quality, but this expansion will only dilute traffic issues for less than a decade before it needs more work. This means it's not only going to hurt us and our communities, it's not going to benefit drivers and ODOT's help for long. If an 8th grader can understand supply and demand, then you should be able to. By adding another lane, you give more space for people to choose to drive, therefore making the public believe that it will be less congested, and it will be until the many people who chose chose not to drive due to bad traffic get on the road and becomes even more congested than before. If dilution is the solution to pollution, then expansion is a recipe for disaster. Or I guess we're calling it an auxiliary lane. But let's get real. You're just finding fancy words to cover up the fact that you are further destroying my future. We are far past the point where your climate denial is valid. The facts are standing strong with clear evidence, much stronger than ODOT's botched data. You have no right to not acknowledge the crisis that is folding out in front of you. Oregon has a long and passionate history for environmentalism, as well as a long history for hurting minority communities. This project will not only project will not help traffic long term, but it will add to Oregon's reputation for shutting out the voices of minority communities.
And it's over time, so I'm going to need to. Thank you. And then our last commenter today is Mr. Aaron Brown. I'll invite you to make your comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Brown with No More Freeways. You just saw a slide celebrating Black History Month and quoting one of my heroes, Ida B. Wells. Her quote, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them," is a curious choice for ODOT, an agency so worried about transparency, it's literally shutting off the mic to stop 8th graders from testifying after 1 minute. The light of truth about this project is that the historic Albina neighborhood was destroyed by urban renewal and a destructive, polluting freeway, a freeway ODOT is now asking you to approve to further expand. The light of truth is that ODOT continues to dodge questions from the community about the width of this freeway, and despite promises of restorative justice, this agency has refused to conduct any accurate study of how much additional air pollution these additional lanes will create. What kind of restored neighborhood is ODOT promising if breathing ODOT's poisoned air literally makes Tubman students and other neighbors sick with asthma, lung cancer, Alzheimer's, and heart disease? How can that possibly be considered restorative justice? I once again ask the members of this committee to demand a full EIS. It's the only mechanism for you to turn the light of truth against ODOT and right these historic.
And that is time. Thank you so much for your comment. And I do not see any other hands raised, so I believe we may advance.
Thank you, Natalie. We appreciate that. Thank you to all of you from the public who came and gave public comment. We appreciate you, and your voice matters to us as well. Before moving forward, I'd like to get brief comments from the chair of our Executive Steering Committee, Vice Chair Orlando Simpson.
Thanks, Erica, and thank you everybody for your testimonies today. Obviously, those are words of passion, and as somebody who speaks very passionately when I tend to provide commentary on anything, I totally understand where you're coming from. One point of clarification, just for the next generation, for you guys to understand, this is my point of view. Others can defer if they want, but the term minority is a derogatory term. And if I were you, I would probably remove those terms from your vocabulary now, because minority means less than. And if you're trying to articulate a way to advocate for people of color or Black or brown, just explicitly say that and not use the term minority. But I just wanted to put that out there, because I would assume that there's other people as part of that movement and advocacy as it relates to climate justice and social inequities that will utilize these terms very freely. And I'm just giving you a very concrete point of reference that it's derogatory to me personally. But aside from that, I know that we're taking baby steps here towards progress, and every day counts, every day matters, every meeting matters, every deliberation matters, every argument matters, every point of view matters. And I think, as it's articulated by Erica on the beginning of this call, it's not necessarily focusing on people, but it's focusing on more of the actual problem at hand. And so I just want to reiterate the importance of these community partnerships that this team has been taking upon itself, and the other organizations that are tied and working alongside to kind of address some of these issues. I think it's very hard to put ODOT on the pedestal as the world savior of all climate and social issues. But I definitely think ODOT can play a very instrumental role in addressing some of these disparities and discrepancies that exist in our local community. But this thing that I want to make sure people understand. I know this is Black History Month, and everybody gets excited about that and wants to contribute and support and stand up the history and and make sure that, you know, we're standing by our commitment to equity and justice. But the reality is once we get to a place where the month of February is no longer necessary, that's when we've been successful. And so focusing on 1 month out of 12 doesn't really do us much justice. I think it's an appreciation of the acknowledgement, as there should be acknowledgement and appreciation to all ethnic groups that have been exposed to imperialism. And that form of hate and polarization is not over. It will actually become more overt now that there is a different administration at the highest of level in this country. This thing called racism didn't make it this far by just being in your face. And so discrimination and hateful acts towards different people just based on a skin complexion or cultural values or principles is something that's going to live with us for a very, very, very long time. And it can get dressed up in so many different ways. And so I want to urge us to be very cognizant of that and be very aware of how it maneuvers and moves around, because it's very slick on how it functions in order to maintain its power and control and suppression of other groups. And so I just want to make sure that this group is fully aware, for me personally, that that is something I'm always aware of and I'm always looking for. I'm not waiting for it. I'm actually looking for it to see what it dresses up as today. And how is it going to try to manipulate the platform that it has in order to further eradicate races that don't look like itself. And so that is something that I just want us all to be aware of and not be afraid to address and to aggressively call out if we see it. And that's the message that I want to leave with you all today as we continue to move through this dialogue around how we use this project to create real prosperous change in a community. There's not one right way to do it. There's economic needs, there's environmental needs, there's social needs. And the main question is, how do we take all of those elements of the triple bottom line sustainability so that we can create prosperity for all three? And that's what I just would like to leave you guys with today. So to just be aware, the fight is not over. Where it's just because things have changed a little bit doesn't mean we have the ability to relax. Right now is where we work harder. And so I just want everybody to take that with a grain of salt and to be thoughtful about moving us forward and accepting the fact that we're not going to do it all perfect and it's not going to be done overnight. It's baby steps. As long as we are working towards a common goal of looking at every human being fairly and equal, then we are going to have success. And that's really all this comes down to. It's human beings. So thank you for the time, Erica.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We appreciate it very much. Appreciate your words. We are going to move forward in our agenda. I want to call out a couple of items, and that is, it is a very full agenda today. And part of what we're going to do is to make sure that we are getting the quality content of the discussion that's in front of us. To that extent, I'm going to move us through our process today. So if you feel nudged, I am nudging us only from the standpoint of making sure that we're getting the content of today's meeting into the space. So in light of that, our director's comments and project updates.
Thank you, Dr. Holt, and good afternoon, Executive Steering Committee. I just wanted to use today to kind of have a bit of a follow-up on some items that we've heard from you and topics of interest at past meetings, and let you know when to expect those topics coming up. As you've heard from Dr. Holt today, is very much focused on our highway cover work. We have an exciting presentation from the independent team for you today, but again, don't want to lose sight of these other areas. So I know that we've heard from you about interest in diving into the CMGC's work product and specifically the diversity plan. So at our March meeting, we'll have an update and have ongoing work with you as the ESC into the spring. And Nate, I know this specifically came from you, so also happy to make sure that we coordinate with you one-on-one, given your expertise in that area, as we'll also do in reaching out to other contracting and workforce-focused community-based organizations. I know we've also heard interest in more detail around the I-5 mainline design, so we'll be bringing that forward at the next meeting as well. Just for a point of clarity, just want to note that, the information that has been presented in text and in graphics in the environmental assessment since February of 2019 is still the cross section that we are proposing. It's 2 through lanes in each direction, a new auxiliary lane, and 12-foot inside and outside shoulders. But more information to come on that at your next meeting. There's also interest in congestion pricing, the toll program, how Rose Quarter interrelates to this, and kind of broader congestion management and mobility plan for the Portland Metro region. And so Brendan Finn, our Director of Urban Mobility Office, and Lucinda Broussard, Director of the toll program, will join us at our next meeting as well to give an update on that program. And then future discussions to come into spring and summer are around the finance methodology, what's the process, what's the timeline, and also following up on the request for a presentation from Portland Public Schools around community engagement. So just wanted the steering committee to know that we have not forgotten about your comments there. Also want to note that we'll be moving forward with a standing agenda item to have the Community Oversight Advisory Committee and the Historic Albina Advisory Board provide direct updates to you as well. So that'll be kicking off in March. On to the next slide, please. And today, main update is really focused around a design modification that we made to the project, specifically the Hancock-Dixon roadway connection, to support an affordable housing development opportunity that's being led by Edlin & Company in partnership with Albina Vision Trust. So we've been working with Edlin & Company since summer of 2020, collaborating on how our project could avoid impacting the Paramount parking site so that the project, in line with our values as established by the steering committee, can help support the development of an affordable housing opportunity and really the first redevelopment opportunity to help support the vision for Albina. So I am joined with Mark Edlin of Edlin & Company to do a brief overview of that specific development opportunity.
Thank you, Megan. Glad to be here today on behalf of our partner, Albina Vision Trust, and our firm as well. And thank you for allowing us to share our combined vision for this property. Rich and Betsy Reese, who have owned this property for 22 years, have long hoped to see it and the surrounding neighborhood of Lower Albina developed into a thriving mixed income neighborhood. When Albina Vision Trust first unveiled their plans for the neighborhood in 2017, Betsy and Rich began discussions with AVT to determine what would be the best way their property could fit with AVT vision. Their dreams for the property included addressing the issues and root causes of homelessness, creating a transit-oriented, design-rich development, including space for bicycles and pedestrians, create a design that is consistent with Albina Vision, find a way to shepherd their property under a new ownership that will ensure it is developed and used in this way and contribute to building wealth for the African-American community. And to help this make this happen, Betsy and Rich are making a significant contribution financially to this project. Specifically for the project, our initial objective is to provide affordable housing at or below 60% of AMI to African-American artists and others who historically lived, worked, and played in this neighborhood, along with a community-based performing arts center seeking to bring arts back in the neighborhood. After studying the property, it became apparent to us and our team that this project would be completely infeasible without altering the Hancock-Dixon design as previously contemplated by ODOT. As Megan said, we have now spent the last 7+ months working collaboratively with ODOT, PBOT, and AVT to arrive at the conclusion that you'll see today. And Megan, perhaps you could shift to the next slide, or whoever's controlling the slides. The site you can see is indicated by the red dot. Adjacent to is the Paramount Apartments, which we are also working with AVT to acquire. So this would be their first 2 ownership assets in the community. Next slide. And this shows how it was sliced and diced, so to speak, with the original plan for the Hancock-Dixon connection. And the remnant property was virtually undevelopable in any kind of an economically feasible fashion. And that's when we approached ODOT and PDOT along with AVT about the challenges that this presented to doing any kind of development on the property. Next slide, please. After long conversations with ODOT and a lot of collaboration and a lot of brainstorming and going down a few dead ends, but not many, together we came up with a resolution that allows this project to go forward. And on the lower part, you can see the existing historic Paramount Apartments. And then in the middle, what would be a theater, performing arts theater. If you think about the black box at the Girding Theater, very similar in design to that for community events as well as performances. And then at the very top, a residential project that would be, again, the affordable housing. And next slide, please. And this is a rendering of what it would end up looking like. Approximately 135 affordable units, plus the theater, plus the 66 units that are in the existing Paramount today. On behalf of our entire team, we'd like to thank ODOT for their collaboration, their openness, and their help in helping all of us find a solution that will enable this project to happen, not only from an affordability perspective, but also really empowering AVT with the ownership of their first assets. That's it. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Mark. And to the steering committee members, wanted to just make you aware of this design modification today, but also note that we will have further community conversations around what the future roadway connection will look like in this area. So more to come on that topic, but wanted to, again, just make you aware of the initial design modification made to support this opportunity.
Thanks, Megan. I appreciate the update and the report. We appreciate that very much. Thanks, Mark, for weighing in. Before we move into the independent cover assessment, let me say two things. One, a quick reminder, it is a packed agenda. It's one of the challenges of a 2.5-hour meeting with all that we have going on. It is just a packed agenda. The possibility is either more frequency of meeting and or more time. But secondly, I do want to make sure that we have adequate and appropriate interaction. And so my role today is to really keep our time, keep us kind of time conscious and keep us on point. From the information that was just presented, I'm going to open up the opportunity for any of the ESC members who may want to respond or ask a question. But please keep it in light of what we're talking about and then in the context of our broader work today. Any questions or comments for Megan and or Mark, ESC members? Yes, President Peterson.
Well, first, I just want to say congratulations to AVT. It's a big step forward. Thank you, Mark, for presenting. And I'm glad that I'll say the royal we, get to see some positive movement in terms of finding a way forward to make it the parcel much more developable for the envisioned end outcomes that I think we're all trying to achieve. So thank you for that. I'll be really interested, I guess. I just wanted to make a note on how the connections are made in the future. Megan, you kind of half answered it, that we'll be talking more about it later. But it just, obviously everything is up in the air for what an actual lid looks like in the future. And so the importance of the conversation that we've been trying to have is the connectivity within the district and the vital, making sure that every connection is vital. Not, what am I trying to say? Vibrant. Thank you. Finally came to my head that we're actually putting energy into each one of these places so that they're not dead, unsafe, perceived or real unsafe spaces to be in. So I appreciate all the work to date and just want to say thank you.
Thanks, President. Appreciate it. Any other comment, Executive Steering Committee? All right, we are going to move then into the independent cover assessment. And we're going to be spending the majority of the rest of our time together working on the independent cover assessment. And I will defer to Nolan, who will introduce and lead us forward. Is it Gina or?
It's Gina, Dr. Holt.
Hi, Gina. I apologize. I will defer to Gina.
Yeah. Well, first, good afternoon. Chair Simpson and ESC committee members. We are excited to be in front of you today. So thank you for the opportunity to come and provide an abbreviated version of our community workshop and let you respond and provide feedback and help us refine it. So our agenda, can we move to the next slide, please? Our agenda today is going to, Nolan's going to talk a little bit about the framing and the scope of work and the things that we will be doing in our work scope, which you've all heard many times, so he'll be brief. And then Kate will be talking about the neighborhood context, kind of to the points that Chair Peterson was just talking about, what's around this area and what potentially can be connected, and also talking about the principles of what makes a successful neighborhood. And then we will be reviewing Stephen Lewis and Olivia Moss from our team will be reviewing the various precedents and governance structures that have been implemented in other Black and disenfranchised communities around the country to revitalize Black and urban core neighborhoods affected by past disinvestment and public policy. So today we'll be asking you to provide some feedback and comments about what you think is important to consider when thinking about the design of the highway covers. And that discussion will happen at various points in our presentation. So we want you to make notes and hold your comments until we get to those discussion segments. We also will be asking you at the very end, assuming we have enough time, how we can make this workshop better for community participants. Our first workshops are on Thursday. Workshop 1 is on Thursday. We have 2 sessions of workshop 1, one on Thursday and one on Saturday. So please be prepared to look at the presentation and experience the presentation in light of the fact that we would like your feedback about what we can do better at the end of the show. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nolan, who will begin to give you a little bit of the background and the framing for the project.
And I heard Dr. Holt, so I'm going to be as quick and efficient as I can be to leave time for discussion. So we just wanted to start by framing for you what work session 1 is. And you'll recall probably that each work session consists of 1 ESC meeting, 1 HAB meeting, and 2 community workshops. There will be 3 of them. And the first one is really focused on listening. And so what are we listening for in this first work session? We are looking to hear what are the types of uses, spaces, and character that are most important to the community, with an emphasis on the voices of the historic albino community, and in particular, Black community members. We know that there will be a goal of creating a new sense of community place and belonging. And so we're going to be interested in how can highway covers contribute to that. And if you go to the next slide, you'll remember that I shared in November with you some examples of highway covers. We talked a little bit about the variety and the program that those highway covers accommodate, the variety and the technical things that were needed to be done to make those successful. Just want to reinforce what they all have in common is that in addition to providing the actual thing happening on their cover, they're also providing connections between 2 parts of a city. And so in the case of Dallas, connecting the downtown district with the arts district. And so we're aware that it's not that we can look just at what is the cover and what's on it, but what is it contributing to the neighborhood around it. So that's really what work session 1 is about, is thinking about what's the big idea for the community, for the neighborhood, and then we will generate scenarios that help to think about how does the highway cover components contribute to that. So next, we are still focused on these 3 questions. And since you've seen them at least 3 times, I'm going to skip over this slide and talk about the scenarios. In the next work session, we will be presenting 2 new scenarios. So the base case, we consider that the design assumptions in the NEPA environmental assessment. The 2 new scenarios that we will be presenting to you In the April work session 2 are one that is limited to the area of potential impact in the environmental assessment and one that is not. And then once you've seen those, you'll have the opportunity to share with us your thoughts about what else we might study, a third option that may be different from the first 2 that we've presented. Next. So as I noted, this is work session 1 of 3. The goals are to solidify our understanding of the community's vision, present some examples of ways that we might achieve that community vision, and you'll see that today in Stephen and Olivia's presentation. We will be gathering feedback to inform the development of our scenarios, and then we will gather feedback on how to measure performance of those scenarios against the community vision so that the community can and you can share feedback with us in work session 2 and work session 3 and help to make sure that at the end of this, we have a recommendation that everyone can embrace. So that's our process, and that's how work session 1 fits into that process. We're going to start today with 2 things, but the first is really just a quick review of some ideas around the neighborhood story and its context and the way that it might set context for the scenarios that we create. And Kate Brooks will be walking you through that.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me? Just want to make sure, check. No, Nolan, can you nod? Because you're the only one.
You're good.
Okay, can you actually back up to 1 slide, please? So yeah, as Nolan said, I'm going to just start with a brief review of the neighborhood history, and then I'm going to take you through some existing context of the area around the API, which for those of you who may not remember acronyms is Area of Potential Impact. Then I'll talk through some possible locations for a revitalized neighborhood in a few focus areas. And these are not meant to be chosen as one or the other, just ways to think about influences and opportunities in placing a focus in one area versus another. So as we talk through those, I'd like you to think about where there is opportunity for a new neighborhood to grow. Next. So this is part of the historic Albina neighborhood in 1938. This area, which is adjacent to the river just south of Broadway, was mostly residential. And you can really see the scale of the houses and streets and get a feel for the neighborhood character that once was. Next. This is the same year, 1938, but we're further north, now looking south toward the residential neighborhood we just looked at. And in the foreground is the intersection of North Russell and North Flint. The future site of Harriet Tubman Middle School and Lillis Albina Park is shown there, dashed in. And we are showing the future alignment of I-5 through this historic area, which we know is sitting directly adjacent to the school. I also want to note that the squiggly edge of the black line, which was drawn with a pen over this photo, is actually the edge of a grade change that still exists today. Next. So I'd like to pause for a minute on this animation. It's showing the evolution of the urban fabric. Oh no, it's not showing. Are you guys not seeing an animation?
Nope.
No, bummer. Okay, well, it's cool. And it's an animation showing the sort of the change of the urban fabric over time. And we'll need to make sure that works as we embed it in the next PowerPoint. You can go to the next slide. So as we start to talk through where a revitalized neighborhood could be, we want to frame the discussion around the API as more of a broader zone of influence that extends out into the adjacent neighborhoods. So you can see these radiating zones over and around the API as our range of focus for this discussion today. Next. These are the adjacent neighborhoods around the interstate and interchange with Albina Vision boundary there shown in orange. Lower Albina is to the north, to the south of the Fremont Bridge and west of I-5. And Boise to the north, you can see Elliott there in the center. Irvington is a little further east. And the Lloyd District is the neighborhood south of Broadway. And you'll see in all of these context diagrams, the API is shown in that black dashed line. Next. So these are the major existing streets and transit lines. And we've labeled some major landmarks for orientation in blue. So you can see in the foreground, the Coliseum and Moda Center, the Rose Quarter Transit Center. Then moving north, Portland Public Schools, across I-5 is Harriet Tubman Middle School, and to the north is Lake C. Emanuel Medical Center. The major east-west connectors in this area is the one-way couplet Broadway-Weidler, and those are intersected with the other north-south couplet Vancouver-Williams, which is shown sort of right center in this diagram. MLK Junior Boulevard is also a major north-south connector further to the east. The MAX lines are represented in orange, and we're showing it as a single color, though there are multiple MAX lines that run through this area, especially at the Rose Quarter Transit Center. The yellow is the streetcar with multiple stops along Broadway-Weidler. And the green dash line represents the future alignment of the Green Loop, which will utilize the future Clackamas pedestrian bridge. Next. So this is highlighting several existing community assets and services around I-5 and in the surrounding neighborhoods. But you can see there really is a concentration of these in the north and northeast neighborhoods. To name a few, at the top is the Vancouver Ave First Baptist Church. Just to the south of that is Dawson Park, and further south, the Williams Russell Project. Just to the east of that is the Matt Dishman Community Center. And there are a number of parks and schools in this area as well. The original, some of the few historic buildings that remain are highlighted there in the center, the Paramount Apartments and Left Bank. And I want to note this is our first pass at starting to label these just with our knowledge of the area, but we certainly want to hear about others that are important to the community so we can understand what's important to connect to. Next. So this is our first geographic focus area, which is in the vicinity of the Rose Quarter, but more importantly, it's the location of the historic Albina neighborhood. And there is an opportunity here to redefine this area to serve the community's needs and goals. There is a real lack of urban energy at the Rose Quarter most of the time. So there could be an opportunity to connect with and activate the large open space there and utilize it for community gathering or other programs that serve the community. This location is also served, as we just saw, by several transit lines and is close to the Rose Quarter Transit Center. And it has great bike and pedestrian connections downtown. There's also potential here to restore part of that historic grid by reconnecting streets across the freeway and maybe redeveloping some of these sites in the area. So the major connections here are shown with a focus on east-west activity, though that's not to say there could also be increased north-south connectivity as well. Next. This area is focusing a little further north of the Rose Quarter and showing strong connections to the neighborhood to the north, where the majority of the Black community was displaced to and now live. The darker red circles in the north are the locations of the local community assets we just looked at. This focus area could be an opportunity for a new neighborhood center. It could embrace those historic buildings that we just talked about and embrace the north-south connections of Flint, Vancouver, and Williams. And there could be development opportunities on the sort of the north edge of the Rose Quarter. And similar to the previous focus area, this area could also support east-west connections and restore portions of the historic grid as well. Next. So this area is further into the north and northeast neighborhood. So given the northern location, we're looking at a potential east to west connection across I-5 toward the historic district of Lower Albina. This is really the only neighborhood that's largely remained physically unchanged. So there could be an interesting way to connect to that historic neighborhood fabric. But we do want to recognize that while it's physically remained intact, it's socially and culturally much different, which is something to consider. Next. So I'd like to go over some of the elements of a successful neighborhood as it relates to physical characteristics. And after this, my colleague Stephen is going to walk you through some similar themes, but more related to the programming of these physical spaces. Next. So a vibrant and successful neighborhood is walkable and well-connected, meaning you can get everywhere you want to go within a short distance. That usually means a 5 to 10 minute walk. And a truly walkable community encourages destination not walking, not just recreational walking. So this means that a wide range of services must be accessible on foot, which also includes transit. If you remember back to the first historic slide that showed the historic neighborhood, that was built with a traditional Portland 200 by 200 square block. And that compact scale really creates easily navigable and pedestrian friendly neighborhoods. I want to point out that the photo on the left is the Clyde Warren Park in Dallas that Nolan briefly reviewed. It is a highway cover and it's reconnected the city grid across the freeway. And it looks like a pretty nice small scaled block size. Next. So just as important as the proximity of uses and services is the design of the streets and sidewalks. So even if there are places you want to go or visit within a short walk of your home, you'll probably not travel by foot if the walking routes are unsafe or unpleasant. So designing safe sidewalks and street crossings is crucial for the pedestrian environment, but the experience should be pleasant. So well taken care of businesses and houses and maintain landscape and nice materials like brick support that. And in order to truly encourage walking, I'm sure as we all know, it needs to be efficient. So a gridded street network is usually the best solution with small to medium block sizes, allowing for quicker routes and more options. I also want to note the photo on the left is of some local community members who you may recognize. Next. So access to transit is a key factor in creating connected communities. Providing a variety of transportation options is critical to ensuring that low and moderate income residents can access places outside of their community for work or other needs, and prioritizing facilities like cycle tracks or large sidewalks promote active transportation, which is activities like riding a bike, skateboarding, or walking. And we know that physical activity improves our mental and physical health. So it's important to make these facilities and transit options be safely accessible and prioritized within the circulation network. Next. Fostering an environment for social interaction is one of the most important elements of a community. And I really like to reference the term healthy placemaking because it encompasses many of these topics we're discussing, from walkable neighborhoods and active transportation to parks and playgrounds and community gardens. These spaces support the community health and giving the residents and the broader community the opportunity to live, learn, and engage in these spaces can promote a sense of shared ownership and really help support a sense of community identity. It's important to note that these should be safe spaces for the Black community. And Stephen may touch on that in his review of some of the program elements in a little bit. Next. I'm not going to talk too much to this slide because Stephen is going to cover this in his content, but a mixed use building program can provide active use of the ground floor, like retail or dining, which can also help create a safe, pleasant walking environment. Next. Again, green and natural environments also provide physical and mental health benefits, and they provide other environmental factors like improving air and water quality and reducing the urban heat island effect. We as humans are drawn, but just biologically drawn to natural environments. And it's important to have access to these types of spaces for our health. Next. Again, I'm just going to touch on this briefly. We are always going to bake resilient and sustainable design into any concept that we work on as designers. One example here of a resilient design program is a community garden, which can provide healthy food options for the community. Again, create a place to gather and support community identity. So next slide. With that, we'd like to pause here and allow for any questions. And we'd like to have a discussion about the neighborhood opportunities you're interested in and where you think the neighborhood has opportunity to grow. So I'm going to hand that over to Gina for questions. or comments.
And Natalie, if you could stop sharing so we could see everyone, that'd be fantastic. Thank you so much. Gina.
Yes, thank you. And someone will have to help me with the hand since you guys are running the show. If you can just cue me up if there are folks that want to speak, that would be very helpful. So
I will keep an eye out.
Okay. Do we have any feedback on what you have seen thus far about?
Yeah, Gina.
Yeah.
If I may, and I probably should have asked this question earlier when we had Mark Edlin up, but, and you know this world all too often as well, Gina, but you know, oftentimes we're in many rooms like this where we have these conversations and clearly this work needs to be done to really assess what is needed. But what I'm still always wrestled with in these type of meetings is where we start versus, you know, where these presentations typically go. And I was looking and hoping and wondering if there's an assessment of like the economic wealth creation portion. You know, Mark presented a project around affordable housing. Let's not kid ourselves. You're not getting wealth creation out of affordable housing. And I sit as the affordable housing chair for the Portland Housing Bureau. So I support affordable housing, you know, for sure. But I'm just looking for what's the angle that is yet to be discussed in any of these sessions around what the wealth creation looks like. I see a lot of projects that aren't going to be projects that people of color probably own, maybe a commercial space. You know, I brought this up last time. What does the real ownership look like? Whether it be rezoning, and this is a question, and I would love to hear the answer. Are we rezoning the area to where people who lost their house years back can now come back and buy a house in the community, ownership? Or are we talking about mixed use development in commercial spaces where we're affording people condos or some kind of commercial space to come back to something? And when I hear that the community is still here when we know it's not, I'm just still wondering, what are people coming back to? And that, I know there's a lot loaded in there, but I guess the first question being the economic development and the wealth creation, because I'm still flabbergasted on, you know, what that even looks like. And I know development and affordable housing and what have you, but for everybody else, I'm hearing people calling me about this very concern. And I know that that's already been put out there by the community. So can somebody help me articulate these pretty projects and how that equates to people of color benefiting, and most particularly Black people?
Appreciate it.
Nate, I think that Stephen will get into some of that very shortly. You know, he'll talk about some of the precedents that have occurred elsewhere where there are Black developers and, you know, CDCs that own land and all of that. And Olivia's going to share some of the governance structures that have allowed that kind of community ownership of assets moving forward. So you're absolutely right. This is an important element, and it will be factored into our work. We will be looking at governance structures and policy and all of that as part of the development scenarios to ensure that whatever is envisioned actually can be materialized in the way that the community envisioned it, which is, you know, in a way that creates wealth and health and cohesion for them. So I know you've been working this, you know, you've been worried about this and concerned about it and making comments about it in every ESC meeting I've been in, and we're going to get to it. You're just out in front of us. So is there—
President Peterson has her hand up.
President Peterson, please.
Thank you. I just want to echo Nate's comment and really just iterate back what I guess I'm looking for to get to those outcomes. And that is, how is the transportation network that we set up through this project and the lid and the width of the interchange and the on and off ramps, how is it leveraging the land uses that we want to actually see? That, I mean, that's the key point for a transportation project, because a transportation project is not built just because. It's built to serve land uses. And in this case, the question is, are we leveraging the types of land uses that we want to see? And are we leveraging the ability for this wealth creation as we go through. So that's the first thing. The second part is, in terms of what I'm looking for, what the Metro Council will be looking for, is whether there are opportunities such as we just saw from the work that ODOT staff did with a specific developer, in this case with AVT and Great Needland. So did they maximize the potential for the property in individual decision making in order to achieve those visions, but also maximize the benefit to the overall community and connectivity that we're talking about. So it has to do both of those. And then thirdly, is it actually investing in the education and living wage job creation for specifically BIPOC folks as we go through this, so that there is an actual ability to afford within the district if it's a purchase scenario, right? So I think those are three that come to the top of my mind of things that I'll be looking for in terms of that. But I just want to really echo that if this indeed is what we're trying to get out of our land uses and our outcomes, that's how this project to me fits into all of this. And if it does not achieve those things, as well as the other bringing down the GHG emissions over, right, then we have a problem, because it's not achieving the outcomes it's supposed to help achieve, but it is a tool in achieving them.
So I want to ask if we could get the slide put back up. We really do need feedback on a particular question. And while we're happy to talk about some of the things that the past two questions have been about, the second half of our presentation is more focused on those. So I would just want to focus everybody on the content that was just presented, which has a lot to do with the physical connections in the community, which are prioritized, which feel like likely or preferable ways for the community to evolve. And so this is where do you think the neighborhood has opportunity to grow, and how do you think the neighborhood has opportunity to grow? We don't have to spend too much time on this, but we do want to make sure we're focused on this answer, because there will be a lot of time to talk about some of these programmatic elements after the next segment.
So do we have any comments in relationship to the question from ESC members?
Well, you're talking about where do you think the neighborhood has the opportunity to grow in terms of like zoning?
It's zoning, it's land, it's land availability, it's it's public partnerships, public-private partnerships, based on the assets that are in the area. It's it'll include the surplus parcels potentially for that ODOT takes, and then at the end of the project has no use for it. It'll include all of those different pieces. We'll be looking at the totality of that. But it's really about what are we connecting, what are we trying to connect to create better community cohesion, specifically in relationship to the Black community. Where are the remaining assets that we have in the community that potentially we would have an opportunity with this land bridging to actually reinforce and connect?
Well, I think it's probably important for ESC members and even other stakeholders of the general public to even understand the cost of dirt and what dirt has already been budgeted for and acquired, and what dirt is being considered to be, I guess, invested in. If you're considering a cap model that's essentially creating new real estate, what's the cost of that dirt? Even though it probably won't be dirt, it's probably concrete and steel. But you get my point. Is that there's a cost per foot for that plot of land, and is that where does the financial performance turn into this now? And now we're starting to get into the weeds, because this is not even in our bandwidth, right? So now it comes back to say, in terms of where do you think the neighborhood has an opportunity to grow? Really, the neighborhood can only grow if there's an adopted, supported plan from the other public agencies that have made a concerted effort to do these things that we're talking about here. because the Department of Transportation really only has the authority to address certain things. And that's where I was saying in the beginning, I mean, I would know everybody wants the sun, moon, and stars with this project, but we have to be practical. Otherwise, we're going to be wasting time just talking in circles. And I'm not a fan of that personally. So I like to get straight to the point and figure out where are other public agencies involved in this, and what have they adopted, and what have they earmarked, and what are they prepared to do, whether it's amending zoning or setbacks or right of way or overlay zones, whatever it may be. What role are they playing in this?
Yeah, and Orlando, I think that all of those questions are going to get addressed in the context of our scenarios, but we're going to take all of those factors into consideration in developing the scenarios. I think what we're trying to start off, remember, we're starting with community members who aren't going to be steeped in all of the knowledge about this project that people studying on the ESC have. And so what we're really trying to do is start up here at a conceptual level, and what do you think needs to be connected in the community at this point, without getting stuck on all the other things that have to happen. We won't propose things unless we can address what we think those other things need to be in any of our development scenarios. But I think what's important is we want to hear if there's any of what Kate presented that sort of feels more like a natural land bridge connection and that reinforces existing assets, or if it's more about where all the other opportunities are, if that's what you're saying.
Thank you very much. Natalie, if you could go back to the shared screen, please, so we can see. We're gonna take one more comment, and we're gonna move into our next section, which may address much of the concerns. And so there'll be another opportunity for ESC members to weigh in after the next section. So hold your thoughts and your comments, but go ahead, Nate.
Marlon had
Let me yield to
Marlon.
Marlon was waiting for a little bit. I'll yield time to Marlon.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, Marlon, didn't notice it.
No worries, I'm listening and learning. So when Ms. Brooks was presenting, what came to mind to me
Marlon, can you speak up a little bit? We can barely hear you.
Sorry, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, if you get close, we can hear you.
Got you. Okay, as Ms. Brooks was presenting, and I wanted to add a little bit to the question Mr. McCoy posed, was is who's going to pay for the aesthetic construction part? Because you're talking about making the streets safe, having places that people want to gather at, and I'm thinking about for the areas that are underdeveloped currently, is that going to, where are those funds going to come from to beautify those areas? And in addition to that, what Mr. McCoy talked about again is the wealth creation, because you're talking about how do you grow the neighborhood. The neighborhood is going to grow. There's folks there, but a lot of us are invested in the Black community. So is there going to be support for Black businesses being in that area? Because nobody's going to give Black folks houses for free, right? We know that's not going to be a thing. But are people going to be able to go into that area and set up their business? And so what support is going to be there for that? And that's the bigger question that I want to know is how is that going to happen? Going back to Mr. McCoy's topic of wealth creation, right? How do we get Black businesses and Black owners in those areas? Because we know that we're priced out of owning houses in those areas, and affordable housing doesn't create wealth, as he stated earlier.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marlon.
So I think what would be helpful is for us to move right into the programming element, because people are talking about programming elements that they think are important to generating wealth. And so I'd like to move into that, and we've organized. Could we go back to the slideshow, please?
And President Peterson just put her hand up, and so President Peterson,
Yeah, to the point of places, I guess what I would just like to, I'm not going to weigh in on specific things that are important to the community. I think that should come out in a planning process, the larger area. But I do want to make sure that we note that there is a desire for the region to move forward with getting light rail underground through the Rose Corridor area and underneath the Willamette and through downtown and up to the west side. So there would be a potential for growth in the area within the confluence of the streetcar, the south of the Moda Center. So I don't think that's a tomorrow. I think it's in the next 20 to 30 years, right? And I think that we should just make sure that we're including that as a potential place to be thinking about for the long term.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that.
All right, I think we are ready to move forward. And Executive Steering Committee members, hold your thoughts and be ready to engage.
So we've organized, can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. So we've organized the outcomes we've heard to date into 3 basic categories, all of which are important to providing restorative justice. That's community wealth, community health, and community cohesion. And Stephen and Olivia are teaming up to talk you through some examples of how these objectives have actually been accomplished through specific program and other Black and disenfranchised communities around the country. So Stephen, you're on. It's your show.
Thank you. If we could advance, please. Good afternoon, members of the ESC and public. Great series of questions. I wish that we had snuck this piece in ahead of them because they're not going to answer everything that you raise, but they'll certainly stimulate further and deeper conversation. So these 3 outcomes that Gina referred to, wealth, health, and cohesion, are part of one overall system that together make for a strong, vibrant community that is at the heart of restorative justice, basically, right? So the images that we're about to share with you show examples of ways that other communities, not unlike historic Albina, have achieved outcomes similar to those identified by the ESC and community stakeholders. While I provide a physical description of these projects, these featured projects, my colleague Olivia will address the kinds of governance models and financing structures needed in order to bring any of these kinds of ideas to fruition. Olivia?
And thanks, Stephen. As Stephen mentioned, as we go through these examples, we'll introduce just some governance models, really focusing on the kinds of entities that can be stewards for new programming and assets early in our discussion, because we know that it's an essential part of making sure that any new assets created really serve the community and are used to accomplish community goals. As many of you have hit on already, the right governance models for both the covers and for new assets delivered around them will need to be determined by the community's feedback and by the community and your priorities for this area. But also need to be supported by the public sector to ensure early activation. These kinds of programs and the entities that we talk about today and that ultimately are right for guiding this neighborhood and community forward should be the centerpiece of this work, which requires both political and community leadership to ensure that they're put in place early rather than catching up once the market responds to changing conditions.
Great. Next slide, please. So here we go with some of these examples. I'm really excited to talk to you about the projects that I was part of in Detroit recently, where an area of the city that was run down and experienced disinvestment, and that was quite a number of neighborhoods in Detroit, not all, but here we have some of the Black-owned businesses that working with the city and through community development block grant monies from the federal government, were able to improve the streetscape. You wanted to know about who pays for improving those streets. Well, there are mechanisms out there, and community development block grants is one source of how you can improve streetscapes, widen sidewalks so that the commerce that these folks are engaging in can extend outward into the street. And on the right upper slide, this branding, folks in the neighborhood refer to this as Avenue of Fashion, which is kind of ironic in terms of the decline that it had fallen into, but now that it's restored, that branding that came from the community is front and center. Having these places, as Kate mentioned in her presentation, that are sending us signals of belonging, ownership, representation, reflecting our culture in these spaces, amount to opportunities for gathering, everything from commerce and foods on the lower left to job training within facilities, mixed use facilities on the lower right. Next slide, please. So here, these existing businesses that already exist or will come to the area should provide employment opportunities for the residents, for local residents. The lower left slide, very near and dear to me, a good friend and colleague, stood this co-op up in Cleveland, part of the Cleveland Foundation. Evergreen Cooperative they stood up businesses that fulfilled a demand of the big major institutions within that neighborhood and were able to offer, about a dozen years ago when this started, living wage jobs to community residents at around $15 per hour with healthcare and other benefits. And with a Fortune 500 CEO taking over that business and another to groom one of the neighborhood residents to take it over within a 2-year period. And these projects are extremely successful. And of course, my ladies in the lower right, working at Sister Pie in the center, which became a neighborhood institution, busloads of Japanese tourists unloading people there every day. The ladies in the lower right, very concerned about the improving gentrifying neighborhood, had a nail salon for years and have looked to the city for assistance so that they can stay and retain their business. Next. Oh, I'm sorry, Olivia.
That's okay. If we can, stay on that for just a second, because I want to point out that, organizations like community development corporations, illustrated by the Black CDC in West Louisville, Kentucky, and the Evergreen Cooperative that Stephen talked about, can intentionally be created to provide economic opportunities for local entrepreneurs and workers through technical assistance, funding, as Stephen mentioned, creation of mission-focused space, job training and placement programs, business launch and ongoing support for entrepreneurs, and information about worker and employee rights and ownership, all of which are key to making sure that members of the community have an opportunity to build and grow their businesses and their economic opportunities. They are really, well suited to provide an on-the-ground perspective for what businesses and workers need, and depending on the mission, can be organized to appropriately fundraise, leverage financing, and deploy funds to implement programs and projects like the ones shown here that provide opportunities for community ownership and economic opportunity.
Great. To go to the next, please. My favorite slide of the bunch, because this is where the wealth creation is happening in Detroit. These are 3 colleagues who I work closely with in my role as the urban design director for the city's planning department, and these folks being private developers who are embarking on very significant mixed use and housing residential projects in the Detroit neighborhoods. This is not possible without partnerships, but these 3 people are my idols, living examples of how people from the community assume this ownership position. Not easy, but they've grown into it. They've assumed at the helm, and Sonia Mays on the right is doing the most ambitious projects in the city as we see it now. So you see the kind of examples of quality architecture and quality built urban environment that is at the forefront of, nothing about us without us is for us. This is a reflection, this is their legacy. And it's important to have that ability to have local people participate, if not lead, in the redevelopment, the physical redevelopment of the neighborhood. I think we can go to the next. Wealth comes in different forms, and the ability to go to a job often has to do with proximity, and can I live in a quality place and a quality residence in a good neighborhood where it's close enough to access my workplace either by walking or bicycling or public transportation. These are examples. Project Row House is an incredible project in Houston's 3rd Ward, where it was a community-inspired effort. It started with the neighbors making demands, and they became very well organized. And it's kind of analogous to Albina Vision Trust and what they're doing. It was presented at the beginning part of the meeting. These things start with a vision and will, and then combinations of resources that come together appropriately to make them happen. If you have a quality place like the child care center I designed back in the mid-90s in the lower right, you can drop off your children and know that they will be nurtured and they will be in a healthy space where at the end of the day, they'll be teaching you something. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, not next slide. Go back, please. I'm not doing a good job of allowing my colleague to lean in. Sorry.
No problem at all, Stephen. I think, you nailed a lot of it here. And I would just point out that, the kind of entity we might think about as appropriate for a project like this one would need to evolve with sort of how the community's needs and desires and readiness to deliver on the vision they see here evolves over time. So it might start with something like a community land trust or community land bank that could provide direct control of land to serve the interests of the community, either before they're ready to develop or to preserve opportunities for the future. And then as the community becomes more organized, organized around specific projects, nonprofit organizations like Project Row Houses can help to deliver assets like housing and associated programming. And as you see development here that is, both market-based as the market grows, it is extremely important to continue to create opportunities for and involve and encourage developers who really represent the community, like the amazing folks that Stephen shared about in Detroit.
Right. There are things like inclusionary zoning, which is at policy level, which establish minimum requirements in market rate projects for a percentage that would be affordable at an area median income negotiated and established, but typically around 60%. Okay, we're going to move on to a series of slides that really talk about health, and community health takes on various forms. I mean, it's body, mind, and spirit and soul. And so we're going to touch on each of those. And this first slide is really about the body, and it's about how in places where we often hear the term food desert, well, there's healthcare deserts as well. And to promote organizations like Kaiser Permanente, who had a pretty amazing program of building smaller medical office buildings in communities that were done in consultation with those neighborhoods so that the healthcare that was delivered was, as we say, culturally appropriate, that took into consideration the basic health nature of health of the residents and design programs and staffed it, as you see in the upper right, with people who are, if not from the community, reflective of that and have that cultural competence in order to deal with issues that are unique to the Black community.
And I think in both of these examples, Project Row Houses, which we talked about before, and the Black Community Development Corporation in West Louisville, which we've talked about before, demonstrate the ability of these organizations to sort of cover, multiple areas of community members' needs, right? From the ability to build wealth, build housing, supply, and build other amenities and assets that are needed, as well as deploy programs that, as Stephen said, are either culturally appropriate or have a sort of double benefit with some of those other focus areas, like at the Hope Wellness Center, not only providing healthcare to a Black community that had previously been underserved, but also providing space for Black healthcare providers to run their business and to also practice.
Great, thanks for that. Next, please. Kate, in her presentation, touched on the importance of having places to grow fresh fruits and vegetables, to harvest them at various scales. And on the lower left, we see a community garden that is maybe familiar to you all, to see gardens taken over on properties about this scale. And on the right, there's this wonderful new project I had something to do with back in the day down in Watts, Los Angeles. It's Mudtown Farms, and it's a huge multi-block assemblage of parcels converted into farms that are provide plots to neighborhood residents as well as neighborhood farmers who have been growing on plots where they often may be squatting, but now gives them an authorized place to grow their wares and to sell them for profit. As we see in the lower right, an example of the kinds of places that support that. Next. Of course, active recreation is a real big part of, I'd say, health, the body, the mind, and the soul. Because like when you're playing ball, like my man down in the lower right, and if you're like me, you become a legend in your own mind, and it's very soul satisfying to think that I could, shoot that three, back Obama down in the hole, do something to him, whatever. But these young people who are in the skateboard park or in the gymnasium, which is obviously, these are safe spaces inside a gymnasium, safe space in a designated area, inviting young people to skateboard, and safe space in the middle of a street in Detroit that's been taken over and converted to basketball courts in the summer, and without having to put up a big welcome sign to brothers and sisters in an 80% Black city like Detroit. This was a tantamount to rolling out the welcome mat. And it just causes this amazing exchange between people of different walks of life that destroys and knocks down barriers of fear of the unknown and really sets the stage for a future that is much more just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive. Let's go one more. Again, picking up on one of the outcomes and themes that Kate talked about, having quality green open space, which in Detroit we considered the anchor of any neighborhood that we were going to revitalize, because it is a place that allows for serenity, it allows for programming, whether that's art, music, dance, other kinds of things. It allows for active recreation and passive contemplation. So the idea that we would look to take advantage of some of the real estate within the community in the area to provide or to enhance existing open spaces is something to think about. Yeah.
And as Stephen said, the way these places look and feel and the programming that's happening on them is critical to making sure that they're welcoming spaces, but so is the way that they're managed and governed, and ensuring that the surrounding community is sort of reflected in the way spaces are run is important to improving or stabilizing the community, and also community health outcomes. How safe they feel in a space will directly affect how much they can use it. So one of the things that we're really looking to hear, from you all and then from the community as we go forward with these sessions is about what spaces should feel like and what programming they should include. And we're thinking about how we can learn from organizations like the public-private partnership created to redevelop the Buffalo Bayou in Houston, and the nonprofit organization organized to oversee redevelopment of the Sun Valley neighborhood, which is an eco district. And so it's really focused on environmental outcomes for all residents. And both entities are really, structured with accountability to what residents are hoping to see in their public spaces as they're redeveloped.
Thanks, Lydia. So if you're a senior or a child trying to pass along and across these streets and crosswalks, get from point A to point B, right now the way our cities are structured, preference is given to vehicles, and it creates unsafe conditions for those of us on foot or riding bicycles. As these new streets over the cover and connections are being restored and created, they need to be done with this pedestrian being elevated to a higher status in terms of the design and the utilization of the public realm. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And the route from point A to point B is, I think, was also mentioned by one of the attendees about safe. This again has to do with the investment in the public realm, and the ways to do that. Where, along with Olivia and her firm, are looking into the various structures like community development block grants and other funding sources that can be aligned with these needs and desires. Next, please. Last series of slides we're going to talk about have to do with the notion of community cohesion, and just showing some examples of when parts of our culture are surfaced and put into the public view, we turn out to celebrate the artists, the creators, and to admire and to bring people who are visiting us by these places to show them off. And that creates a sense of pride, one of the fibers of cohesion. And then the left, a very prominent Detroit artist, just recently passed at a ripe old age, Charles McGee, unveiled this incredible sculpture to a audience of hundreds of Detroiters who came out to just enjoy and celebrate that. And that has become one of the focal points. It sits on the grounds of the Charles Wright African American Museum, which itself is a monument, a testament to Black history and culture. Lower left is a project that's just leaving its conceptual realm in Los Angeles to be executed, and it's called Destination Crenshaw. The idea that President Peterson said about taking light rail underground in the vicinity creates a whole other dynamic of transit-oriented development potential. And if it is 10 or 15 or 20 years off, now's the time to secure ownership of that land, which will only increase in value once a rail line is established. And so that becomes a very key thing to keep your eyes on. But here, again, Destination Crenshaw is very expressive of the Black culture of Los Angeles, which was centered in this neighborhood, but has been losing ground over the years ever since. And there was just a will of the people combined with politics to bring this project to fruition. And you'll hear about it. It's going to be an amazing thing. And if you come to Los Angeles, somebody's going to drag you down there to check it out.
And I think Stephen really, hit the nail on the head that Destination Crenshaw is a great example of a public-private partnership, and one that I think, to Marlon's earlier question, we will look to as an example also as to how public and private funding can be leveraged together to create a space and programming that reflects Black culture here. So, as sort of where we started was that, these partnerships and structures like this will require both public sector and community leadership and an ongoing commitment to work together. And as we look at these examples and think about how they're relevant to this project, we'll also be thinking about the different sources of public and private funding that could be used to support them and what that means for different entities' roles going forward.
Thanks, Olivia. And before we go to the next one, I just wanted to say that it was helpful to me to once again refer to the way that community cohesiveness was identified and defined in the EA document, the environmental assessment document. And just indulge me for a minute, because this could be also good for you all to hear and germinate in your minds around these kinds of images. Community cohesiveness is identified by a variety of factors, including but not limited to an identifiable community boundary, which we looked at some slides about that potential, concentration of people with similar economic and demographic characteristics in an area, common ethnic, cultural, racial identity of residents, shared experiences and values, critical mass of a specific demographic community's population, concentrations of community serving businesses, community-based activity centers and institutions that address the unique needs of residents in the area, active street life and pedestrian activity, and last, shared gathering places for recreation, expression, celebration, and social connection. And in reading those and reflecting on them, I think we've sort of touched on almost all of them in the images that we've shared. Yeah, more food for thought. So we'll just go one more slide here to how you mark that territory, how you establish those boundaries, how you mark that space. And on the left, there's this really elegant environmental graphic design signage program in Birmingham, Alabama, that is distributed around the perimeter of the downtown area, each sign telling an element of the civil rights history of the city of Birmingham. Very powerful, and made more powerful by the beauty of the design of the signs themselves. Colleague Renee Kemper-Tan responsible for that. And the Africa Center, I'm gonna pivot to Gina because she's gonna take over the conversation again, and she had some useful information about the Africa Center that you see on the right.
Well, the Africa Center is a center for the basically all things African and Black. It's for the African diaspora, wherever Black people may be in the world, and the kind of culture influence, how they've influenced culture and food and music and all aspects of life, throughout different cultures around the world. So it's a place of celebration, of research, of knowledge, of gathering, and it's that kind of, those kind of places that become very important to anchor community and to perpetuate community. So if we could go to the next slide, we're going to wrap these up.
Yeah. So I still have a couple of quick ones. So these are just examples of having places and buildings, both buildings and public open spaces, to hold cultural events and programs. Those are very important puzzle pieces in creating a sense of belonging, pride of ownership. Next one. And then lastly, using culture to attract the greater public to a branded destination that equates to economic opportunity by lifting up what is special and unique about Black culture, particularly in the historic Albina community, and elevating that to a level where it becomes an economic engine, using the interest that we're experiencing today in this moment we're living in our culture and who we are. There is great opportunity to celebrate that beyond just our own community enjoying it, but to have the broader community learn about us and enjoy it through experiencing what we hold special. Next.
So these are some local examples of just creating community in small ways. The top picture is of the Apano Center, which is the Asian Pacific Island Center out on Southeast Division, and newly created. It's a place for gathering. It's a place for demonstrations, for business development. It's a place where the community can come together, reinforce itself, and further its economic goals for itself. The other two pictures are of small placemaking grants that Metro has done. One of them is actually the Living School of Arts, and the other one is the Morpheus Project Youth Project. And these are grants where, to create place, reinforce community culture through activities and programming in specific neighborhoods. And so there are small examples of how you can just seed the creation of community cohesion in small ways. So with that, next slide, please. At this point in our workshops, we would be breaking out into small groups to discuss all of these programming ideas. We would be using the mural board, which is essentially an electronic whiteboard, and we will have people in our small breakout groups who can actually record things on these. So these will be kind of a permanent record of the discussion that goes on in each of the groups, and what kind of programming and outcomes they want to see happen in this neighborhood. But because of time, our time limits, and we're gonna stay in the large group. We're not gonna do small group breakout, and we're gonna ask for your feedback if you'll go to the next slide. We'd like to have a discussion with you today about these two things. So what are the most important types of programming and spaces that you think need to be created in this revitalized lower? And without talking about the governance and all of that, it's clear that we will not be able to create spaces. Anybody who knows about land values and real estate development, you don't create spaces that are communable, accessible to community, the Black community, the disenfranchised communities, the BIPOC community, without bringing other partnerships to the table to create, in conjunction with any kind of land development that actually allow those things to happen. So what we want to kind of focus on is what do ESC members feel are the types of programming and spaces that you think are important to create in this lower Albina Rose Quarter neighborhood, in the neighborhood overall. So the covers all of this won't happen on the covers, but as several of you have already commented on, the covers can essentially seed some of that development. So we'd like to just open the discussion up and hear from you about what are the most important opportunities for wealth creation based on the kind of examples we've provided you, for health creation and for community cohesion that you think would be important to create in this neighborhood based on your knowledge of this project, your knowledge of the community, and your knowledge of the other stakeholders that are working in that community. So.
Perfect. Let me just, before we started responding, we've got about 30 minutes for this work. So Nate, I see your hand, and Gina, I will do my best to capture and direct it to you.
Appreciate it, Chair Hope, and appreciate the presentation, Mr. Lewis, as well as Gina. I really enjoyed the presentation, to be honest. I really loved where it ended with community cohesion. One question that always hits me upside the head when I see all of the work happening in other cities, and it's almost a question back to you all, because I just want to understand in the context of Portland being very different than other cities that we just described. Detroit, I actually happen to know, and you probably know him best, Mr. Lewis, Maurice Cox, the city planner for Detroit. Had a chance to meet him, get to know him. One thing that he told me and that you hit on was the reason why he was able to move that community along is that 80% of the community looked like the people we're serving. And when the automobile crash hit, they had a lot of blighted property. We don't really have that context here in Portland. We got a lot of heavily, valued property, a 6% Black community, and a very uncohesive Black community in that regards. So I guess my question before, others even jump in is like, how do you even equate that or navigate that, knowing that some of those projects have way better concentrations of people of color than what Portland has? And then knowing the complexity around where we're trying to zone or build is some of the best dirt right now in the city. Like, how does that actually impact how people evaluate what they can and can't do? Because I agree, everything I saw seems like what we need on this project. Training centers, a sense of community-led buildings that, you can benefit from, but just my 39 years in existence in Portland, Oregon, and my family who grew up in Bethel AME, the oldest church in the Black community here in Portland, who was displaced and not a part of the history we talked about. Like, what would I say to my ancestors that says, hey, like, our population is very different than what's going on, in Detroit or somewhere else? I guess, what would you respond to that, Mr. Lewis, and maybe even Gina? Because I'm just trying to digest how we model something in a very diverse city in a very undiverse city like Portland.
Sure. Well, ultimately, Detroit's an 80% Black city, but it has a complete strata of wealth and economics. So the neighborhoods that are getting the attention would be getting them irrespective of who the what the population looked like, simply because the city has to come back. And there was a political will, and this is a will that bubbled up from the bottom up, and the mayor heard it as he was running for office. Ironically, the first white mayor in decades in Detroit had to re-earn that trust. And by the way, Maurice goes back to me to 1977 when he did his first internship at my dad's office in New York City. So that's how we tight. But the structures, first of all, it came from community being organized, which the Lower Albina communities organized. Maybe there's different facets and different groups who are organized differently, but there's a potential for the kind of organization that then can move, much as LTV is LVT, in working with developers and bringing about that. The key is to find intentionally the Black developers who may be in Portland or might probably aren't, but who will be willing to come there and do that work. Now, people see green at the end of the day. So, you know, it's really about trying to articulate through a process like this where the initiation comes through the ODOT freeway project. We have to do something here. We've done this wrong. We're about to be active in this area again. We got to restore some justice here in one way or another, right? And so that's what this process is about. And your questions, Nate, are just beautiful because they are everyone's questions. And you know what you're doing by putting them on the record is allowing us to focus our responses to adequately answer and address those issues, right? I'm not going to try to answer them all right now. We just talked about structures like community land trusts, community development block grants, you know, but on top of all that, there has to be a political will. The mayor of the city is going to have to make somebody unhappy about some stuff to put things in position for the resources to be aligned with the wants and desires. And that's just cold hard truth.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Nate, you know, the issue, you know, I guess we've got people, this is a question for our public and elected officials, you know, I mean,
literally,
in a lot of
yes.
ways, what are our public and elected officials, you know, going to do collectively to actually come together, understanding that this is a unique set of circumstances, but there are commitments that everybody is making to a certain vision that, you know, and how is everybody going to come to the table? We can tell them what the tools look like, but then people are going to have to come to the table. So I think part of the role of your work at the ESC level on behalf of this transportation project, when there are alternatives that present certain things, is going to be, you know, there has to be some leadership that gets taken to rally the wagons, essentially, to make, you know, to bring the vision forth. So what we're focusing on now, and what's been, I think, kind of fitful in this, in our presentation today for you guys, is you guys want to know how and when and who. And what we're doing now in this first workshop is we are just trying to understand what the community values, what it envisions for itself. We're not trying to say we can't do that, we can't do this. We're not trying to think of what all the problems are at this point. We're trying to understand what's important to the community and bring that forth, and then that, you know, fold that into scenarios that we then have the answers to some of the kinds of questions you're answering based on what the community says it wants to see. So it's a process where we're starting with community and trying to get the community to vision what's important to it, particularly to the Black historic community that has been displaced, largely displaced from this area. So it's a question, it's a great question, and it's a question we all need to be grappling with as we get further into the process, you know, when we know what the what is.
Through our surveys that'll be part of the workshops, we'll be able to suss out specifically programmatic elements and get a vote from, you know, attendees as to how they prioritize those things, whether it's childcare, whether it's, you know, access to transit, or what, you know, whatever those issues are, business ownership, home ownership, or rental, you know, affordability, whatever those issues are, they'll be presented and they can be ranked through a survey.
And real quick, one more thing. Is there any study on financial modeling for any of this work at this point, or is that down the line? Because I think about crowdfunding. I think about there's one entity that controls the pot and disseminates it to the community. I guess real quick before Marlon goes, is there information that we'll hear about around?
There will be. Yeah, we'll have.
Yes,
we will have.
we'll be breaking it out.
We'll
So we're going to go to Steve Witter. Excuse me, everyone. We're going to go to Steve Witter after Steve, then the response and interaction, and then Marlon after that. And then if any other hands come up, I'm watching, and Erica is helping me. So we'll catch you. And again, we've got another 20 minutes or so. So Steve Witter.
Dr. Holt, I'd rather actually hear from Marlon, because I saw his hand go up in a reaction and want to make sure we catch it.
Okay. Marlon?
Marlon, please
You're
unmute
muted,
yourself.
Sorry. So as the question went out to what's needed in the community, two things really stand out to me because my day job, I moonlight as a teacher. So two things that really stand out to me is workforce innovation as far as apprenticeship programs. There has to be access nearby in this area that's providing something besides just go to college, right? That our young people need to know they can do something else, that college isn't the end all be all answer for everyone. But along with that, there has to be mental health therapy. So many of our communities struggle with so many generational curses. It's very hard, a struggle to see when you help a young person get into these programs and then they fall short because they don't understand certain Eurocentric concepts that are outside their realm of normalcy, right? Things that they're not used to doing. Like we all know, time is super important, and it's something that many cultures struggle with, and especially for people from our community, it is essential that we learn the value of time and how that applies to a work ethic, right? And so, but we struggle with those type of things, and we have mental health issues in our community. So those are two areas I think that we need to strongly be able to supply in this area is access to everyone who needs it. And I don't know, we have this stigma in our community against seeking mental health help, but we need to let our young people know that they can get it, and that's going to help them move forward into these programs, because they don't stick with them because they fall short because of the many generational curses that they have to deal with.
Thank you for those comments, Marlon.
Steve,
I'd just like to thank Marlon too before you give it to Steve W. Marlon, that's sensitively said, well said, and well heard.
I would second what Marlon said as well, having mental health struggles in my own family with my own children. So I appreciate that, and we ought to break down those barriers. I guess what I was commenting on, and Stephen and Gina, you just sort of got at it with kind of your last comments, is, Stephen, I think what I heard you say is this project ought to be the spark that creates these other entities to come on. And Gina, you were starting to say it, and thank God you said it. There needs to be political will from our political leaders around this table, because the root of my question, maybe Stephen, I'll let you dish the question to whoever on your team, or Nolan, how much can a highway interchange improvement project do? And Stephen, you said it as it was kind of the spark. So I just kind of want to leave that out there, because I think we think concrete trucks and concrete finishers are going to solve these problems.
So Stephen has been really careful to tell all of us, don't overcommit, don't promise too much, and we will continue to do that. The reason we're asking of all of the things that are priorities is so that we can answer that question, Steve, which is, how much do we think these can contribute to the broad community need, and we'll do it a couple different ways, and then we'll hear feedback from everybody about how well those are meeting, or whether there's something that's a priority that we haven't included. So I think the answer is, of course, it's limited. We're going to give it our best shot. We're going to get your feedback. We'll make it even better. But yeah, it's a great reminder that we've got to keep in mind what we draw is not going to serve all of the needs and wants.
I think at the same time, the way we build, and I don't just mean the construction jobs, but I mean who has control of the property at the end, is, I think, one of the biggest opportunities in these kinds of projects.
Thank you, Steve. That is really part of the opportunity here, for sure. It is part of what needs to be considered as part of the opportunity. Absolutely.
Bryson,
Erica, are you guys seeing any other?
Yeah, Bryson's hand is up.
Yeah, so I think to build on that and to kind of touch on what Nate mentioned earlier when he was talking about how can this project, be a vehicle for wealth creation. I think about kind of where this project is located and what, in that it's in the center of this big commercial area where near the Rose Quarter, near the convention center, near some hotel areas, close proximity to downtown. And when you think about sort of wealth creation, what sort of types of things are going to be the most efficient vehicle for that? Um, this probably isn't the best place for, a house. Not to say that you couldn't have housing here, but it's probably not the best place for housing. One of the things that you could really maximize though is low cost commercial, either office space or retail space that, and then kind of thinking about what Steve just said, where they are leasing their space from a landlord that has that's probably a nonprofit with a specific mission to help and to provide business space, affordable business space for those companies, so that they could leverage the central location of whatever parcel that we're talking about. So I think it's really thinking about kind of how we can put the hands of the property itself under a management structure that could provide a space to connect people's companies and people's businesses with the retail and commercial resources of the area, especially as the area increases in development. I think will be key and will be helpful.
Thanks, Bryson. Good thoughts. Any other feedback about the things that ought to be on our list, that we ought to be thinking about?
Yeah, a couple things. Steve, I see your hand. I'll have you lean in just a moment.
Yep.
We have some community members that are wanting to weigh in. And so my direction for community members is to email your thoughts, please. Email your input and your interest and your concern. And then also, we'll make sure that we get you connected to the ICA and the upcoming events. I'm sure that Gina and the team would love to have you in the space participating in the actual engagement. That would be fantastic to have you engaged at that point. Absolutely. Unfortunately, at this moment, we could not open it up to the broader community. Not that we don't want to hear from you. It's just this specific meeting, while it's open to the public, is not a public meeting. You have the opportunity of weighing in, listening to what's going on for the executive steering committee as they're working through the particulars and specifics. We do create a space for public comment, and I know that it is squeezed and tight, but again, this is not a public meeting. It's a meeting open to the public. Stephen, did you want to make a quick comment? And then we have President Peterson.
In response to Bryson's point, I wanted to just highlight one of the projects that we shared, the Evergreen Cooperative. That was conceived of around existing institutions that were centered in a Black community where people would come and go to and from work with no collateral benefit coming to that community in the process. So it was like, okay, well, what are the things that these hospitals and these universities need? They need food and they need linen service. So they stood up these two business models specifically to address the demand that these institutions like the Moda Center or any other major piece in our community would need, right? Whether it's the school needing some things, whatever. Maybe it's a Kinko's, it's Black owned, it comes to serve the Harriet Tubman School, whatever. We got to think in terms of building on the opportunity that the existing institutions have that can be met by new businesses that are community owned.
Thank you very much, President Peters.
I just wanted to take a minute while my husband is making dinner for me in the background, apologies, to acknowledge that I believe the only elected officials on this committee that are left are myself and PPS Julia Brim Edwards. And I just want to acknowledge that commitment and highlight two things moving forward because it was specifically called out. Actually, three things. The amount of time and energy that Metro has and the Metro Council and staff have put towards this area in order to achieve the outcomes that the community has yet to completely weigh in on, but to empower the community to come up with some of the answers to the questions that have been posed here today. But then also recognize that there are non-electeds who also need to make that commitment. And I know that Chair Simpson on this committee, being part of the OTC, is a non-elected but appointed, has made a commitment, and that the OTC is certainly listening and weighing in, but it is just as important for those non-elected appointed officials as well as the TriMet board. And I know Steve is here and representing, but it is just important for those non-elected officials to make the same level of commitment and get called out and be part of this conversation, as well as those elected officials who have hopefully just temporarily stepped away. And we will be able to bring back into the process the city of Portland and Multnomah County being two of the more important bodies that need to be represented back here. And I hope that we can find a way to acknowledge the issues that they raised as they walked away and have them come back with some commitments from both elected and appointed that are here on the board to make sure that those issues are resolved and prioritized. Thank you.
Thank you. All good points.
Thank you. And at this point, I do not see any other hands raised from the Executive Steering Committee. Any other comments at this moment? Gina, if you could speak then to how the public might engage with the work.
Yes. We will be opening up online workshops or surveys and open house and surveys on the February 26th at www Albina Highway covers. So you'll go to our website and there will be a place where they can go to the online open house. And there will be a series, some background information and a series of questions that they can answer. They can take our survey, and that information will all be part of what we factor in into our thinking about this next phase of work where we're creating the development scenarios. So I think if there are no other questions from the ESC members, I guess we would like to pivot. I guess I would ask just one more time if people have any more comments or feedback on the specific information presented. No?
Excellent conversation.
And
excellent contribution. Thank you. Go ahead, Gina.
Chair, Dr. Holt, what I'd like to do is just ask a different question of the ESC that essentially, when we get done in the workshops with the group discussions, we'll come back in, they'll report out, and that will be essentially, that will close out our workshop one. So essentially what we would like to do, that's pretty much the wrap up of our abbreviated show for today, but we would like to take a moment and have feedback about what we can do different, better, thinking about what this workshop is intended to do, which is to listen and assess what is important to the community. It's not to solve all of the problems about the how-tos, but to really collect the information that helps create the vision. Are there things that the ESC members think that we can do better, differently in presenting this information to the community? And we'd like to hear any feedback about how we can improve this presentation and our engagement with community from the ESC members today.
Tina, real quick for me, are we by chance recording all of those sessions? Because as you know, often in the community, not everybody can make the meetings, but they probably want to weigh in at some later date. So I hear you nodding. So that's
yes, that we will be, all of that will be recorded and transcribed, even down to the large groups and the breakout groups will all be separately recorded. Yes.
Okay, and then I would love, and I don't know, I mean, I'm gonna look to Dr. Holt and, you know, Chair Simpson on this, but I would love to allow community to come to our ESC meetings, given what Dr. Holt had already heard from folks today, because I think it's important for us to also talk to the community as well. And, you know, I know how my schedule is. I don't want to speak for others, but I would love to hear it, you know, raw and uncensored and, you know, be able to have a back and forth if possible. So if there's any folks that really want that opportunity through your efforts, I would love for them to be granted permission to come and, you know, follow up or at least get our take, because part of our job, as you know, Gina, is we represent the community too. So I don't want anybody running up to me in the store and saying, hey man, I heard what you had to say, or you being puppeteered, and you know, and that ain't the case.
Can't escape, Nate.
Yeah, can't escape.
You know how it is.
I would love that opportunity. I just, you know, again, I hopefully Chair Simpson and Dr. Holt agree, but I think everything you guys are doing sounds great to me.
Thank you, Nate. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nate. We've got a hand for Brendan. Sin.
Thank you, Dr. Holt and Gina. I know we want to move on, but I just wanted to build on what President Peterson said as far as those partnerships and having the right people at the table. You know, we really do want to earn trust back from our partners that departed. We've tried to show some of that intentionality, build that trust back. We also want to build that trust back with the Albina Vision Trust. So I didn't want that to go without mentioning as well. We'd love to have them back at the table as well, and trying to show them through some of the efforts that Megan articulated earlier that we're changing the way we do business and trying to earn that trust back. So just wanted to mention that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you.
Feedback on what we can do better, differently as we move into our first workshop with community participants.
I don't want to miss any comment that Jana might have. I know, Jana, you're always courageous to speak, and I know you were managing a lot going on, but hearing your voice around this work, I think, is significant. Any thoughts?
That's grossly unfair, Dr. Holt, that you would ask for that this afternoon. No, I think you're headed the right direction. I don't know that this is, that I have, I think what I saw was a pretty fair assessment, and I don't really have anything to contribute here. I apologize for that, so.
Thank you, and I certainly don't want to put you on the spot. Yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you for your continued wisdom and investment. Comments from any others? Chair Simpson, any thoughts, sir?
Yeah, thanks for picking on Jana a little bit, because usually she's the one who picks on people. So you got her talking a little bit. But no, for what it's worth, I can only understand or what it is to be like in Jana's seat, because you know, everybody, like, you know, we can all ask for the sun, moon, and stars, but you know, Jana's constituency are going to be eating most of the costs, and so that's a really hard position to be in. And so, Janet, for what it's worth, I commend you for sticking in here and being patient through this process, because I would assume it's not easy for you in your seat, because I would assume you get poked on a lot, saying, "Hey, how are things going? Are you going to be digging into my pockets, Jana?" You know, so. But aside from that, I would have to probably second Brendan's comments and even Gina's comments earlier, and more importantly, President Peterson's comments as it pertains to partnerships. This is a conversation about, you know, whether it's elected, non-elected individuals participating in this process. It's going to take all hands on deck in order to make this cake. And I'm just adamant about getting back to where we started with a very diverse group of stakeholders, public and non-public, that were, at these tables talking about how it is we want this thing to play itself out. I don't think it matters how we got to this place or where we're at, but the key is how are we going to get back on alignment and on the same course and headed towards, whatever we define as our North Star. And so I'm just adamant about making sure that we continue to focus on bringing those stakeholders back to the table so that we can work collectively together for these shared outcomes we're hoping to create for this part of the city and region for that matter. So that was it really, Dr. Holt, just wanting us to embrace this idea of partnership and that collective community working together.
Thank you. Thanks, Vice Chair. I would say to the Executive Steering Committee, did we miss someone?
No, it's Jana again. Can I say one thing now that along
Well,
on the spot?
Of course you can.
I do want to, I didn't hear anything in the conversation today that said that my members were going to be paying this cost. And I think that is what we build and what it costs and who pays for it. Those conversations, to the best of my knowledge, have not come up yet. And so I think I'm not presupposing that I'm paying or not paying. So I think we need to keep that in the back of our mind during this discussion too. I'm not sure what we're buying yet. I guess that's part of the discussion, right?
It is, absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you. And so to the Executive Steering Committee, I extend to you the exact same that's been extended to the general public. There's ongoing opportunity of interaction and dialogue. Of course, we talk frequently, but there are ways to make sure that thoughts that come to your mind and the concerns that you have, that you can articulate them as this work continues. To the ICA team, I appreciate the effort and the energy to be succinct, clear, expeditious today. Great job, everyone, for weighing in like you did today. Are there some next steps, Gina, that the ESC needs to be made aware?
Yes, the next steps will be that we're going to, synthesize all of the information from our engagement, our work session 1 engagement activities this week. And the online runs through March 12th. So it's the 26th of February through March 12th. And then we'll be running real fast to create those alternatives that Nolan talked to you about in the front end. And we'll be bringing those back in work session 2 for people to start reacting to. And this group clearly is ready to chew, to chew the meat, not to figure out what kind of meat they're chewing on. So I think that hopefully when we get to the next steps in the next round of engagement, that we'll have things for people to chew on, and we'll have ideas about, what kind of partnerships need to be created to really materialize the kind of vision that has come forth from the community and the kind of outcomes that have been expressed as things that they would like to see happen in this area. So that will be work session 2 is in April. Our workshops are in the middle of April. And we'll be coming to probably it will be coming to ESC before that to preview our information that we're going to be processing with the community again. So that's it. And I guess the only other thing, Dr. Holt, I want to say is I want to thank the ESC committee, Chair Simpson, and the rest of the members for allowing us to take so much of the agenda. I know that this committee is anxious to deal with a number of aspects of the I-5 Rose Quarter overall improvement project. And our work is very condensed and needs to happen in a short period of time. And we just appreciate space being made and for people partnering with us to work through this so we can get to where we're trying to go.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks again for all the work let me remind us that we will be meeting again on the fourth Monday of our next month, March. And so I'm sure you have it on your calendar already, but it will be March 22nd, not the 29th, but the 22nd, same time. I'm going to date myself here, same bat channel, same bat time. For those of us who remember that. For those who remember that. And I will, what, Steve?
I'm sorry, but you and I have to connect offline because there's a gentleman who's the CEO of the Watts Labor Community Action Committee who has a entire warehouse full of cars like the one behind you. He has a similar story to yours. Love to connect you two brothers.
Yes, sir. And I was just about to make a comment about backing Obama down in the paint. I was going to end with the reality. About 10 years ago, my sons told me it was time to hang up my tennis shoes. And then I decided I'd pick them back up and we'd do a little workout. And I beat them both about 3 summers ago. So, you know, for those of us who still believe we've got it, game. So, for what that's worth. Erica, if you would help us wrap up today.
Indeed. Well, thank you all again. ICA team, we appreciate all of the work that you're doing. We know that it's a heavy lift. This is a unique community, as Nate mentioned, but I believe collectively with all of the institutions, organizations, and those private partners and citizens, we can do something very awesome. One other opportunity for ESC members to participate even more closely with the ICA team would be through this new subcommittee that you all have approved. And so I am hearing those who we might be plugging into that opportunity to meet with the ICA team once a month in a more in-depth level, as we often cannot get to every discussion during our meetings. And so just be keeping that in mind in the next few days that Dr. Holt and I would touch base with you to confirm who those would be to serve on the new subcommittee with the Executive Steering Committee members, members of the Historic Albina Advisory Board, as well as the ICA team. Just want to reiterate how important it is as we are try excellence, our thought behind equity and inclusion is that we center human dignity. And I think all of the collaboration, the partnership that we're talking about here really is about imploring all of those efforts to center human dignity for us to benefit from our differences, for us to promote and encourage doing business differently. And so thank you for leaning into this discussion today and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody.